Our simulated mock off-season continues here on today's episode of Locked On Dolphins with a look at free agency, both the in-house expiring contracts and free agents I would sign if I were the Dolphins from other teams starting next week.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is sponsored by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Welcome to the 2024 Miami Dolphins offseason blueprint with yours truly here on Locked On Dolphins. We did yesterday our introduction to the 2024 Miami Dolphins offseason blueprint, in which we looked at getting cap compliant was really stage one yesterday. And the moves that were made through cap compliance. And if you missed it, take these shows chronologically, please. I'm sorry you can't binge watch them. I'm not like Netflix or HBO. We're going to drop the whole thing in your lap at once. We're systemic with recording of the program. But this is my favorite project of the year. And I went into why yesterday with the introduction and getting the Dolphins cap compliant. And what happened with restructures and a contract extension is I got the Dolphins to a place where they had about $32.5 million in salary cap space. That did not reflect a Tua Tagovailoa contract extension, which will be part of tomorrow's conversation on the show after we work through free agency today. And what that could look like, the ramifications of that, the salary cap implications of that, and whether or not you would prefer that that happens or not is really neither here nor there. That's the direction that they're going. And with working within the parameters of understanding this is kind of the direction this team is going to go, that's the blueprint, is to say, okay, how can I maximize the team within what vision we understand for the team? So $32.5 million in cap space for the 2024 Miami Dolphins offseason blueprint. It's not a small amount of money. It's also this fine line you got to walk, and this does not reflect, obviously, it was reported yesterday, Christian Wilkins will not get the franchise tag. He will test the market, and I would expect he will be gone. And I will expect he will probably get over $100 million on his next contract, be that with the Dolphins or some other team. He's going to get a big payday. And I would not play Christian Wilkins on the franchise tag for $21 million because you have 32. I just created $32.5 million in cap space. That is the easily accessible amount of money. You can get more. You could restructure Tron Armstead, which we didn't do. But there's long-term 2025 and 2026 ramifications for doing that. They wanted to push all their chips in this year. You could say, yeah, do that. You could get the contract extension done with Tua Tagovailoa, but really banking on that happening to access another $10 to $12 million in cap space, it's a complicated negotiation, and that's not just going to happen overnight. I was kind of hoping that they'd get their ducks in a row and they would get it for the start of the league year, so you'd have an extra $10 million in cap space to operate with. But that's not how it appears as though it's going to manifest. So we're operating within the assumption right now that free agency, which is what we're doing now today on the show, will come with that amount of approximate operating salary cap space. So the first question is, who are you bringing back? Right? League calendar year starts in 8 days. 8 days. Free agency starts. Legal tampering starts in 6. I love some legal tampering. But you have a chance to kind of close some deals with guys internally first. Here's what I would do. I would bring back the following players. I'd bring back Andrew Van Ginkel. I would bring back Kendall Lamb. I would bring back Deshaun Elliott. I would bring back River Craycraft, Elijah Campbell, Isaiah Wynn, and Justin Bethel. Those 7 players. You got 2.5 starters out of this group. I guess technically you could say 3 with Lamb as a half starter and Wynn as a half starter. The big name here is Andrew Van Ginkel. And we've kind of talked about throughout the course of the offseason thus far, Van Ginkel's perceived market versus what the free agent class looks like for edge rushers. And Brian Burns just got the franchise tag from the Panthers. So you can cross his name off the list of names, not for Miami, but names that other teams would pursue that would check the box where it would alleviate the need at edge. But you still have potentially Danielle Hunter, potentially Josh Allen. We'll see if he gets a franchise tag today. I would expect that he does. But then you get into kind of the stratosphere of non-franchise tag guys and top of market guys. Zadarius Smith, Bryce Huff, Jonathan Grenard, Jadeveon Clowney, Shaq Barrett was a cap casualty from Tampa Bay, Josh Uche, Leonard Floyd. These are all players, Chase Young, that are kind of in the same stratosphere as Andrew Van Ginkel. And I think for Miami, the market there will allow Andrew, who's coming off of an injury, to be a little bit more of a palpable and digestible negotiation to bring back. Now, I wouldn't give him a huge deal, and we'll get into contracts for each of these guys here in just a minute and what this does to your salary cap space in general. But again, want to reiterate, Andrew Van Ginkel, Deshaun Elliott, unquestioned starting caliber players. Isaiah Wynn is a starting caliber player who you can't rely on to stay healthy. I would bring Isaiah Wynn back with the intention of him being a utility backup offensive lineman. I would love to have offensive linemen 6, 7, and 8 that can play as many positions as possible and put Isaiah Wynn in that bucket. Ideally, you get to the start of the season in the 53-man roster, and spoiler alert, that's where I get with this Dolphins roster, with Liam Eichenberg as a utility offensive lineman, not a projected starter. I have Isaiah Wynn back as not a projected starter. Was able to assemble a collective group with the resources that we have between the draft and free agency, which are bringing these guys back with the intent of saying, hey, optimal positional flexibility, guys with starting experience as compared to guys like Lester Cotton and Rob Jones are your backup offensive linemen that are playing a combined 1,000 snaps for you. So if you have the same catastrophic injuries that you had this year on the offensive line, the guys that are stepping into those shoes are Liam Eichenberg, Kendall Lamb, Isaiah Wynn. Isaiah Wynn should be a pretty easy and low-cost negotiation for Miami. For a guy who played really well, you just don't want to bank on him to start, so he's more of a spot player for you. Deshaun Elliott, we mentioned. River Craycraft, I think between special teams and being a reliable wide receiver that Tua Tagovailoa has shown some chemistry with, I think that's a player that makes sense to bring back because that's not a big money player. Elijah Campbell, special teams player. Justin Bethel, special teams player. Van Ginkel, Craycraft, Lamb, Bethel, Elliott, Wynn, Campbell. Expiring contracts, I'm bringing back. Which leaves your key departures. 3 quality starters are probably going to leave. Christian Wilkins is a roster cornerstone for you. That hurts. There's no taking that away. Losing a roster cornerstone is never fun. It hurts. It's emotional. There's feelings from the fans. Players probably can feel some type of way about it. I think everybody understands business is business. Christian has earned the right to maximize his opportunity, and he's going to go out there and I promise you, he's going to get a contract that some fans who didn't want Christian Wilkins to leave are going to hear what he gets and says, oh, he got that. They gave him that. I bet it happens. I don't think Christian Wilkins is leaving to sign for $22 million somewhere. Add a couple more million on top of that annually. But then you have Robert Hunt. We did the contract on Robert Hunt. I said, this would be what I believe is a fair market offer for Robert Hunt based on where he's at this stage of his career. And this is what we'll internalize. The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And look at how the Dolphins handled the Christian Wilkins to Zach Sealer negotiations. And look at the history of spending for this organization in recent years. They've spent on the quarterback. They're going to spend on the quarterback. They've told us they're going to spend on the quarterback. They spend on wide receiver. They spend on offensive tackle. They spend on outside pass rushers. They spend on corners. The perceived premium positions. Expecting them to offer a top-of-market contract to an offensive guard when you can get 90% of the same player in the same way that Zach Sealer, to no disrespect of Zach Sealer, he's one of the best 8 football players on this team. He's one of my favorite players on the team because of the journey that he's had from Ferris State, being cut by the Ravens and getting claimed by the Dolphins and developing and doing all the things that everybody points to for Christian Wilkins. Say, well, he did all the right things, did everything you asked, and now you're not going to pay him. Yeah, because Christian Wilkins wants the bag, and he deserves the bag. But the needs of the many versus the needs of the few. Zach Sealer came in as a waiver claim, worked hard, did everything you asked him, and they rewarded him with a contract. And the contract's about half of what Christian Wilkins is going to get. For 90% of the same player, I'd expect they pursue the same types of pursuits at offensive guard with Rob Hunt. Your spoiler alert, Rob Hunt outgoing. Connor Williams also outgoing, and then a few other notables. Brandon Jones, third safety. Braxton Berrios, more for his special teams role. A couple of quality depth players for the Dolphins. Now, those are the players I'm bringing back. We'll talk about the cap implications and then switch gears to external free agents. That is next year on this offseason blueprint episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you stick with us. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is sponsored by BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. I know I certainly do. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you ideally like to use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know it's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters most to you so you can do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It is designed to be extremely convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. It's entirely online. Fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any point for no additional charge. Learn how to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. So we know who I'm bringing back. Let's talk about the contracts, the outlook of the contracts, and what that does to the Dolphins salary cap space. If you're watching on YouTube, which I would recommend this week, is there's a lot of visual components to the show to kind of help illustrate all of the work that's been done. And I love when I have to make a last minute change on these things and have to redo 8 slides, but that's neither here nor there. That's my problem, not yours. 2024 Dolphins player re-signings. I think you have 3 players that would be qualified as adequate level starters. That if you have them in specific roles, you're getting really good value, particularly for the money. So Andrew Van Ginkel's down here on the books for a little over $3 million for his year 1 cap hit. This would be one of those contracts that I would explore. I'd give him a 2-year, $15 million contract. 7.5 per is a significant upgrade over what Andrew played for this past year, which was about 2.5, 2.6. I'd put a void year on the back end of this deal. So it's a 2-year deal for 2024, 2025. I'm intent in exploring adding more edge players, whether that's veterans, post-June 1st veterans, the NFL draft. We'll get into all of that. The point is the Van Ginkel extension, I want to leave the door open to continue to have him under contract, but I want to minimize the 2024 cap hit because we are in a bit of a numbers crunch. So you put a void year on the back of that deal. It gives you 3 years to space out what his signing bonus would be as compared to 2. You can get him for a very digestible dollar amount on a 2-year, $15 million a year contract, which is my offer to Andrew Van Ginkel. The next biggest contract from an average pay perspective is Kendall Lamb. And I'm shooting high here, right? Because I'm sure some teams would look at the work Kendall Lamb did this season and say, dang, come be our swing tackle. He played for like $1.2 million last year. It was less than $2 million. I'd pay him 1 year's $3 million, which is about the market of what guys like Donovan Smith, who signed to be a starter, signed for with Kansas City. It was a 1-year, $4 million contract. I think you look at some of the other offensive tackles. George Fant, $3 million. Mekhi Becton coming off his rookie contract is a little bit of a different story, but then like Cameron Fleming was a utility player and he was just under $3 million. Josh Neisman with the Packers is in that same stratosphere of dollar amount. So that for me, I think is enough of a pay increase to keep Kendall Lamb as a quality depth player as your swing offensive tackle. And with Teron Armstead's injury history, that is unfortunately important. Deshaun Elliott, he played last year for 1.7. I'd give him a multi-year contract. I'd look for his pay average to be around the same dollar amount, about $3 million per season. The year one cap hit there for Deshaun Elliott, $2.5 million. He's played on a couple of one-year contracts, so I'd give him a couple years with some guaranteed salary, and that would be the incentive for Deshaun Elliott in addition to a pay raise. Isaiah Wynn back for about the same amount. This is about a $2 million 1 year. You want to make it 2 years, $4 million versus 1 year, $2 million. However you wanted to slice that. Isaiah may covet the short-term opportunity to bet on himself and get back out on the market again. But again, that's the same stratosphere where he played this past season, and he played 6 games in 3 plays and got hurt. Elijah Campbell, River Craycraft, Justin Bethel, these are predominantly special teams players. They're low-value contracts that it's going to be very easy for you to accommodate. A couple $1,000s above what the 51st player on your offseason roster is going to end up being. So it's next to zero needle mover once you hit 51 players in the offseason, because it's Elijah Campbell. You could probably re-sign for $1 million, $1.5 million, 1.1. River Craycraft played last year for 1.1. Justin Bethel played for 1.2. Like, you can get all those guys back in similar ranges, and it's really not going to change those 3 guys combined might move the salary cap once you hit 51 players by $1 million combined, right? So that's the benefit of the 51-man top 51 offseason salary cap, is you're kicking players off as you add beyond 51. And when it's that close to what your bottom level salaries are, it's not really impacting you until you have to make the decisions down to 53. And then those couple of $100,000 come back and get added back to the cap as well. So that leaves Miami with $18 million in cap space after Van Ginkel, Kendall Lamb, Deshaun Elliott, Isaiah Wynn, Elijah Campbell, River Craycraft, Justin Bethel. 3 adequate level starters, 3 quality depth players, and Bethel is a replacement level, but a good special teams player nonetheless. I just don't think he has the same ceiling as Elijah Campbell as a young player. You kind of know what Bethel is on defense, and he's not somebody you really want to play there. So $18 million before you get into external free agents, which is where we are going to take this conversation next. Who should be brought in from elsewhere across the league to help fill some of these needs, to help provide starting caliber players? Miami's going to have to find some of them. And they did it last year with Deshaun Elliott for a 1 year, $1.7 million contract. They did it with David Long last year on a 2 year, $12 million contract. They've done this, and they picked their spots, and they've had the opportunity to do it well, which is the testament to you can do it, but you have to have the right understanding of who's coming into the scheme, who the player is, how they accentuate who your cornerstone players are. And there's margin. There's margin for error here. Not margin of error. There's margin for error here. Not every hit's probably going to go well. Case in point, I know I did the blueprint last year, and I had Colin Saunders signing, and Colin Saunders got like 2.5 times what I projected with his contract. So that's one element of margin of error for the offseason blueprint. But then also there's free agent signings that don't go well. I don't think anybody thought Miami was going to pay River Craig or was going to pay Braxton Berrios $3.5 million for him to be a solid special teams player and a good offensive complement for the first month of the season, and then disappear and never come back and struggle down the stretch in separating in the middle of the field areas where that was supposed to be where he added some extra value. So it's tough. You're anytime you're transplanting out of a different environment and a different scheme, and you're transplanting it into a new environment with new players around them and having to quantify that with dollars, that's the risk of free agency. Now, I like the class that I have. I like it a lot, especially when you consider, okay, I feel like I have found a replacement for two of the outgoing offensive linemen, Connor Williams and Robert Hunt. I feel like I got good replacements at discounts that are both adequate level starters with some ceiling within this scheme. That's next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. Get buckets with your first bet over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. So you can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to shoot your shot today with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So external free agents. We have $18 million starting on March 13th? We'll have $18 million. So, okay, here's your operating cap, $18 million. And when we did this, when we talked about what operating cap Miami needed earlier this offseason, we said it's about $20 million. So here we are. My formula has you at 18 of cap compliance to add players. I added a couple starters with my free agent class. So here it is. Here's my free agent class for this mock offseason. The highest contract goes to interior offensive lineman Damian Lewis from the Seattle Seahawks, a 3-year, $30 million contract. This is the same principle as the not paying Christian Wilkins to pay Zach Sealer element. Lewis has some of the same qualities to his game as Robert Hunt. He's not as big as Robert Hunt. Robert Hunt's a college tackle. Damian Lewis is 6'2" versus 6'5". He's not quite as long as Robert Hunt. He's not quite as fluid or dynamic as Robert Hunt. But he's got just the same bit of power as Robert Hunt. He's got good football IQ. He's got excellent leverage as a 6'2" player. He's mobile enough in getting onto the second level and playing in space that it's a totally different ballgame than Lester Cotton and Robert Jones. I think he has enough range to shine in this scheme, Damian Lewis. Tight end Noah Fant, also a Seattle Seahawk, 3-year, $24 million contract. That's an $8 million per year average. That's about what Dalton Schultz got last year. Damian Lewis at $10 million per is much more of a middle class, but still like a significant investment. It's about 4% of the salary cap as the average of that deal. Fant, athleticism, seam busting ability down the field, run after catch, much more of a fluid athlete than Mike Gesicki. If you could have told me Miami would have traded Mike Gesicki for Noah Fant straight up, I would have thrown a parade. I think it's a massive upgrade for this system where the point of emphasis is players with the ball in their hands just as much as it is about speed. And we've all seen what Mike Gesicki looked like with the ball in his hands trying to make people miss. Aaron Brewer, center. This is a signing intent to be a center. He's one of the smaller offensive linemen in the league, but explosive, a ton of range, some pretty good leverage. I think the Connor Williams model as an undersized center, if you're going to go after another player like that, I think this is another, and Connor's injury may impact what his market ends up being. This is another 85-90% of player for reduced cost that makes it much more palpable. That's a 2-year, $11 million contract. So 5.6, I think, is what he played on his last deal, offered in something similar. Devin Duvernay, for the wide receiver from the Baltimore Ravens, I have added as well on a 2-year, $8.5 million deal. This is just as much about special teams, though, as it is about the skill players on offense. Duvernay's a nice player. He's not a volume player within your offensive attack, but he's one of the best return men in the game. And if the Dolphins are going to keep things going with Danny Crossman, the assumption here is that they have said the issues with special teams lie within the talent that is available and the players on the roster versus the coaching element of the game. Now, Duvernay played 13 games this year. He caught 4 balls for 18 yards. But the year before, he started 13 games, had 37 catches for 407 yards and 3 touchdowns. And he's made the Pro Bowl for 2 seasons prior as a return specialist. So you're paying a pretty penny to bring Devin Duvernay into the mix. But I think there's an electric element of his game that is really difficult for me to not have an appetite to say, yes, this would be worth it for Miami just because you got to kickstart that element to your roster. I'm signing Rock Ya-Sin, cornerback from the Baltimore Ravens, familiarity with the scheme as a veteran corner to compete with Cam Smith, a guy that is kind of this year's Eli Apple. I'm giving him a 1-year, $3 million contract. Marquise Haynes, senior, from the Carolina Panthers, a vet pass rusher who 2 years ago had, I believe it was 5 sacks for him. He's got some really nice tape. He struggled with some injuries this past season that I think gives him a opportunity to bet on himself. Yeah, he had the last 3 seasons in Carolina from 2020 to 2022. He had 12 sacks in those 3 seasons, 5 in 2022, and had 13 quarterback hits in addition to those 5 sacks. So he's a rotational pass rush type player. He's not somebody like, let's temper expectations. He's not going to come in and be a starter for Miami. But if he's a rotational guy, I think he has enough pass rush prowess. And I think he's the right kind of bridge type of player that you're not breaking the bank for, that can give you some value while you figure out what's going on with Chubb and Phillips. So that gives Haynes and Van Ginkel as 2 edge guys added to the ranks of what that roster. When we did the roster assessment yesterday, we already said, look, it's a pretty lean group. And then just a player that was cut yesterday, I'm adding to the ranks, and it's Foley Fatukasi. And he had played with the New York Jets. He'd signed a 3-year, $30 million contract with the Jaguars, and he got cut out of that contract just yesterday. I think there's a rebound opportunity for him. That's an experienced player who I would absolutely love to add into these ranks for Miami with what they have right now of Zach Sealer and Brandon Peely. I mean, Fatukasi, he came in the league in 2018, 6'4", 320 pounds, not a big-time pass rush threat, but had been a really good player at the end of his rookie contract with the New York Jets before signing that big deal as a 27-year-old vet in Jacksonville. I think there's the right blend of size, anchor against the run. When you think about Anthony Weaver and his scheme, their interior guys, they like having 320, 315. Like they like having some bigger bodies between Michael Pierce and Travis Jones. And I think Fatukasi, even at this stage of his career, could be like a reliable backup A-gap defender type of player who can kick out into the B-gap, like what the Dolphins tried to do with Raekwon Davis. But I think this is a better fit. And ideally, Fatukasi was cut off his contract. So signing him does not negatively impact the compensatory formula where the Dolphins are probably going to try to game the system to pick up some comp picks for letting quality starters like Rob Hunt and cornerstones like Christian Wilkins on top of market contracts walk out the door. You could be looking at a couple of 3rd-round picks for that, depending on how this whole thing shakes out for 2025. Comp picks, you got to wait a year. That's the downside. So that's my free agent class. I got 7 guys back off the team for Miami from last year's team, and I got 7 guys from free agency elsewhere. Here's the ramifications of that. Damian Lewis gets a 3-year, $30 million contract. His year 1 cap hit for distribution of cap is $4.5 million. Noah Fant gets a 3-year, $24 million year contract. His year 1 cap hit is $3.5 million. Aaron Brewer signs a 2-year contract for just over $11 million. His year 1 cap hit is $3.5 million. That's kind of structured similarly to the David Long contract as far as the splits on that cap. Those are all adequate level starters that I would put asterisks next to all 3 names because I think they can be better players in this system. Like I think there's an upside for each one of those players to come in and be a quality starter if things click the right way. I think there's enough of an overlap of fit. And that's where like I'm picking and choosing my spots. I've watched the film on all these guys. I watched film on 160 free agents in the last 2 months. So I can sit here and come on here and feel like I've got a really good base of knowledge for who the right players are for Miami. And based off what we currently understand of who the Dolphins want to be, there's overlap here. Those players make a ton of sense. Devin Duvernay, just reading between the lines on what Miami's decision has been on special teams and what they invested in Braxton Berrios last year versus what they got. Devin Duvernay is a quality depth player, as a probably fifth wide receiver, but a primary return specialist who can give you a lot of juice in the return game. Rock Ya-Sin, the familiarity with the system makes a no-brainer. Marquise Hayes Sr., low-value contract. Foley Fatukasi, low-value contract. All of that takes Miami from $18 million in cap space to after this 7-man free agency class. And don't worry, if you're sitting here saying, Kyle, this is great, you're putting all these cap hits up on the board, but what about 2025 and 2026? That's Friday. I got a 3-year rolling cap with spreadsheets that we're going to go over, talking about how these contracts implement the salary cap for 2025 and what that could look like in the 2024 Miami Dolphins offseason blueprint, to ensure that this is not just a 1-year fantasy land cookie cutter pullout that's not attached to long-term ramifications. We go over all that in this too, and that's why this is such a fun project for me. Because you got to account for that. You can't just pop on here and say, oh, I'd sign X, Y, and Z for A, B, and C and this much dollars. Okay, but what are the ramifications of it? Where does that put the team next off season? That's Friday. So that's coming. Just know that. But I say all that to say, Miami's at about $2.5 million in operating cap space with their top 51 players after the 7 players I'm re-signing from Miami from last year and this 7-player free agency crop. And I replaced an outgoing starter in Robert Hunt with Damian Lewis for a contract that's is going to be less than half. And maybe Damian Lewis comes in here and has a market that's $13 million per year. And if that's the case, okay, I'm going to take a bath on probably $500K more on the year one salary cap hit, but I'd still do the deal. Noah Fant is an upgrade at the tight end position. It's the missing link, third piece in the passing offense that I would hate to go into the draft feeling like I'm boxed into a corner with. I got that box checked. Aaron Brewer, direct replacement for Connor Williams. Similar athleticism. Not quite as big of a player, maybe a little weaker anchor inside. But I got another big-bodied guy in Damian Lewis to step into one of the guard spots. And I'll promise you this, I ain't done investing in the offensive line. And when that's all said and done, you're going to have Teron Armstead, Damian Lewis, Aaron Brewer, Player X, Austin Jackson with Liam Eichenberg, Isaiah Wynn as backup players, along with Kendall Lamb, who I added in free agency. If that's your 1-3 on the offensive line, I'll look you in the eyes. Do you feel bad about it? Probably depends on who that 5th player is, right? That's Thursday when we do the mock draft. So that's where we're at. Free agency class in the books. Did some transitions for players that are outgoing from Miami. Have not really addressed the interior offense or interior defensive line. That's kind of a black cloud that hangs over the Christian Wilkins departure is the one that really you don't feel good about at this stage of the game. But you have the draft. You have some levers that you can pull. You can see what the post-June 1st looks like. We'll get into all of that the rest of the week here on Locked On Dolphins as we continue the 2024 Miami Dolphins offseason blueprint. I hope you guys enjoyed and have enjoyed and agree with at least some of my hypothetical, what would I do on the path that the Dolphins are set out on this offseason to field as competitive of a roster as they can for 2024. Come back tomorrow for the Tua Tagovailoa decision and contract and all of the discussion that 50% of you might love and 50% of you might hate, but it's a conversation we need to have nonetheless. I'm Kyle Krabs. Keep it locked in. We're here on Locked On Dolphins. I'm out of here. Fins up.